First of all, a disclaimer. This film that I'm about to review is made in 73, written in 67, made in 73. So, some of the views of the current or that time's social feelings or feelings around gender are reminiscent of that time, and they don't fit today's mores at all. That being said, this is a great farce, and it's not really very well known. It's written by and directed by that fantastic farce writer Ray Cooney. He's written so many farces. In fact, I've been in one of his farces, Chase Me Comrade, which is around a defecting, not defective, you wouldn't be bothered if he was defective, a defecting ballet dancer. And it's of its time. And I did it about 15 years ago, very popular. He came to see it and was marvellous because he just put money behind the bar and said, all have a drink on me. And then after about 10 minutes of seeing people and saying, this is the best production of this show I've ever seen, he left and said, it's your night, not mine. Great, wonderful to see. And this is Not Now Darling, which is towards the mid-period of when he was starting to do so. Wife Begins at 40, and that kind of Run for Your Wife, yeah? That kind of farce. And, you know, farces are a certain thing. And they don't really translate to what's happening now in comedy. Frasier famously tried this. They had real farce work with doors and that kind of thing, but it doesn't always work now. In 1973, it really did. The plot is convoluted, but it's all set in one place, because this was first done in the West End in 67 and then just expanded and extended a little to make into a film. One of the producers of it is Tony Tenser, who is thought to be a kind of shock film producer. You know, those kind of horror films that shock rather than scare, that kind of thing, and that sort of thing. So, and it's directed by Ray Cooney, who's also, he's co-directing. He co-wrote it with John Chapman, who wrote Fresh Fields and French Fields, but don't hold that against him. He wrote it as well, co-wrote it as well, and he stars in it. Oh, this is a Ray Cooney show, and he's the best thing in it by far. The basic plot is that you've got a fur manufacturers, and another disclaimer, this is about the fur trade. To a certain extent, they're a high class, what are they called? Furrier, aren't they? And the character is Arthur Crouch, who is part of Bodley and Crouch. Bodley is played by Leslie Phillips, who is playing at his loose. Well, I say best, but actually there's not much sort of holding him down in this. The great thing about Leslie Phillips, still around, still doing wonderful work, you know, until recently. The thing about Leslie Phillips is he's always after a bit and he never gets a bit. In this, he's going to get a bit. And early on you think he's quite insufferable, actually, because it does seem as though he's going to have an afternoon of sexual intercourse with somebody, which is not usually what you get with Leslie Phillips. The whole idea of the farce is that you have to have social mores and class systems set up. This is a high-class shop, and consequently, you can't see any shenanigans going on. Plus, you can't talk about sex. Plus, you have a certain class system, so you have higher class clients. The commander and his wife, for instance, Cecily Courtnidge is in there in her last film. Great. And then you have people who are new money coming in there. That's the great thing about Farce. People make ridiculous decisions because they don't want to break the social mores. At no point can you say, for instance, in No Sex Please We're British, which is, I suppose, the zenith of those kind of farce films. Brian Runicles, played by Ronnie Corbett, in a never standing still performance in that film, has a load of naughty magazines delivered to the flat above the bank at which he works. His friend, played by Ian Ogilvy, staying in the flat, also works at the bank, and at no point do they say, these must have been delivered wrongly. They make a decision because it's easier to have an excuse and to try and get rid of them than it is to tell the person who runs the bank these have been delivered, because he might think that they're yours. It's about human frailty as well, and we don't have that sort of thing now. We don't have those social mores now, and that's why we don't have farces now, and that's why farces, when they are in theatre seasons or on TV, are old farces, brought up to date if you can. So this is about Leslie Phillips trying to get off with someone who is promised a mink coat to. She's played by Julie Edge, and she is the wife of a rather flash businessman, Mr. McMichael, played by Darren Nesbitt. Now, I remember sitting in a green room with Darren Nesbitt when I was doing the farce, actually, at the theatre, because he was in the show before, talking about, what happened, mate? You were on everything. Remember, he was in Dick Emery's "Oh You Are Awful" film as the villain Sid Sabbath. Just the best nasty gangster name I've heard in the comedy world. And suddenly he went to South Africa for a while, I think. That's what he told me anyway. Anyway, he's in here as the husband of the woman that Leslie Phillips wants to, in inverted commas, knock off. There's all that going on. Must understand that. A lot of that going on. Leslie Phillips has said, well, Julie Edge's character has said, I will do this if you buy me a mink coat. It's a £5,000 mink coat. It takes £4,500 out of the bank and says, okay, I can't sell it to your husband, but Arthur will do so. Arthur, played by Ray Cooney, who is wonderful with the minks and the furs, but not good at selling. He's a very timid gentleman. And he is the choral figure of this film with a moral centre. There's always somebody who's put upon and who has to do most of the work in these farces, usually played by Brian Ricks. Played an awful lot of these characters. So he's the counterpoint to the rather loose Leslie Phillips. Everything takes place in one room, more or less. We have a concierge, Bill Fraser, in very much Bootsy and Snudge type style. You must go and look it up if you don't know it. And he's commenting on the action as well. And they have people who come and go. There is a central door. And then there's Ambrosine, who is their receptionist, played by Joan Sims, in a kind of... you can always trust Joan Sims to do the work. Good actor. Not just someone who does comedy. Good actor. She keeps it all together there. And then you've got a door one side of the room and a door the other, because you're going to get Julie Edge's character naked in a fur coat. You're then going to get Barbara Windsor with two birds. She's going to see her boss, who is Mr. McMichael, who is also wanting a bit of an affair with her. She's carrying two birds. She's been to the vets, just so she can say, I'm giving my tits an airing, etc., etc. I might let you stroke them later, etc., etc. That's what farce does, though. There are those big jokes, really. And she's going to end up on one side, sans coat, sans dress. They need the dress for Julie Edge's character. Then they find they can't deposit the dress because Mr. McMichael's coming back. There's an issue with the fur. Mr. McMichael wants to buy it, then doesn't want to buy it, then he wants to give it to his secretary, Barbara Windsor. Her husband is Jackie Pallow, well-known wrestler in those days. So you want to keep him away from you. In the meantime, Leslie Phillips' wife, who was away, comes back, so he's got to keep her away. He's got to keep her away from the flat because he has laid out a lovely negligee for the shenanigans in the afternoon, and an overnight bag. So he's rushing around like a blue horse fly, getting everything sorted in that way. It's brilliantly done. There are doors closing and opening all the time. There are people rushing out all the time. And in the middle of this is Leslie Phillips, who can't really cope with the whirl of all this as things start happening, and Crouch, who comes of age because of it. He doesn't want to be involved in it. He has the moral centre. He says to Leslie Phillips, to Bodley, I keep thinking of your wife. And as Bodley said, you really must stop doing that. But he comes of age in this time, and he starts to think one move ahead. If I get this person in here, if I do that, if I do this, and he becomes more of the time. You know, he's able to see through the veneer of all the kind of social mores, to tell people exactly what he thinks and what he needs them to do, which leads to him proposing to Ambrosine and them being together by the end. Of course, by the end of it, I'm not going to tell you how it ends. By the end of everything, it's nicely resolved because Mr. McMichael and Mr. Bodley's wife, they know each other. Oh, yes. And consequently, the fear dissipates. But it's beautifully done for the whole of it's an hour and a half long. So for about, 50 minutes, maybe even an hour, there is a constant whirl of ins and outs and who's coming up the stairs and who's coming out, who's in which doorway and who's going to come out. And I can give this dress to that person. No, I can't because you're here. That's going to go over the balcony. Lots of clothing goes over the balcony. Now I need to find another dress for this person. They're coming out inappropriately here. I need to push them away before that person sees. It's great. It's beautifully constructed. Farces are beautifully constructed, and you need a kind of crossword mind to do it. If I bring this person in here and this person, you need a big chart to say this person's on this journey, this one's on this journey, they intersect here. And to be able to perform it, you need an absolute understanding of the plot, the mores, the jokes and how to turn the jokes, the ridiculousness of it. There is always a part in a farce where the person who is put upon, in this case, Crouch and Ray Cooney playing Crouch, there is always a sense that at some point things are so silly that he can make ridiculous comments. And it doesn't matter because I've never come across this before and it's amazing. And then he starts enjoying it. So once you've got all those things together, it's the enjoyment of it. You've also got people like Graham Stark and Peter Butterworth across the road, looking in at the balcony, who are painters, saying, what's going on here then? Butterworth doesn't have a line. He just eats his sandwich. He's got a full mouth most of the time. A bit of cash for him, just a little bit of cash. A day here, just a day, I suppose. But it really is very well done. You can tell it's a theatrical piece. And, for the pure precision of that kind of farce and the pure precision of turning a gag and making it work. For instance, in Chase Me Comrade, here's an example. It's one of the only ones I can give. There is a gag where there's a man from the ministry who has been shut up somewhere with a bottle and he's got drunk. So there's a scene where he's falling all over the place. There's a chaise longue. The character who I played, who was the Brian Ricks character called Jerry Buss, thinks, here comes the commander. I'm trying to squire his daughter. He can't see this. So he sits on the chaise longue with the man from the ministry, with his head between his legs and a blanket over them. So it looks extraordinary. The commander comes down, goes away, comes back and said, how tall are you? Because it looks as if he's about 10 feet tall. Then he comes back again later and says, what are you doing? And the line is, Just stretching my legs. That gets a laugh. 2 beats later, the man from the ministry crosses his legs. That gets an even bigger woofer. It's the precision of these gags. And you've got people like Julie Edge who can't really turn a gag, and people like Barbara Windsor who can in a very imprecise way, but the character is ideal for her as a secretary, someone of a lower class, because it's very class-based, all this. And then you've got Leslie Phillips in the middle, who's doing exactly what he can turn a gag, very loose. You've got Joan Sims, who you can absolutely trust. And in the middle of this, Ray Cooney, who knows exactly what he's doing with this part. It is a masterclass of comedy. And if you can get over this is very 70s, and the attitudes to women, which is not acceptable in today's society and not ideal, it's of its time. If you can get over that, this is superbly worth seeing. It's on YouTube and it's worth a look. And after that, you're probably looking at No Sex Please We're British. And the performance of that, of the central put-upon character by Ronnie Corbett, is an absolute gem. This is a 4.5 out of 5 because it's got some real laugh-out-loud moments, but it's the precision and the gag turning that makes me proud that I did this kind of work when I was an actor. Ta-ta.